Today I'm going to talk about a story that happened in December of 2014 in a small village called Rakowiska, Poland. A gruesome crime that shocked not only the local community, but also the entire country. The police officers who worked on this case said they had never seen anything like this in their careers, maybe in a film, but not in real life. And the crime scene reportedly did look like a scenography for a Tarantino movie. My name is Alex, and this is Poland Unveiled. Hello everyone, welcome to episode 1. The story begins in 2012. A family of 3 lived in a flat in Biała Podlaska, in Lubelskie Voivodeship, in eastern Poland. There was a mom, Agnieszka, a 40-year-old high school teacher. She taught Russian. She was also a sworn interpreter of this language. Her husband, Jerzy, was 46 years old and a former police officer. In 2012, working as a border guard, he held the rank of colonel. He didn't work in the field anymore, but in the border guard's headquarters in Warsaw. For this reason, he had to travel to work over 160 kilometers one way every day. His job was important to him, but so was his family. He probably realized that he didn't spend as much time with them as he wanted, especially with his then 16-year-old son, Kamil. Jerzy tried to make his absence up to his son by making sure that the boy always had anything he would need, and more. That's why Kamil would always wear nice clothes, have some money for shenanigans, or use a state-of-the-art smartphone. At the same time, it didn't seem to have spoiled him. Kamil was always described by his family, neighbors, or teachers as quote-unquote normal boy. Smart, sweet, helpful, and anything but rebellious. He also maintained a good mommy's boy kind of relationship with his mom, Agnieszka. At some point in this family's life, about 2012, one of the family members died, and Agnieszka and Jerzy inherited some money. They had always dreamt of having their own house instead of living in a flat, and the opportunity presented itself, although in such circumstances. They bought some land in a village about 7 kilometers away from Biała Podlaska called Rakowiska, and built their dream house. After years of living in a small flat in town, they could finally enjoy the suburban peace and quiet in a freshly built home, and it seemed that a new chapter began in their life. 2 years later, in 2014, when this story happened, Kamil was almost 18 and in the 2nd grade of his high school. Quite an exciting time for a Polish teenager. You're just about to get your first ID, your driver's license, and soon enough, you'll be allowed to drink and vote, and you may already feel like an absolute grown-up, even if you're still with your parents and have to go to school. Kamil had always been a good student. He also had friends and a girlfriend, and everything seemed to be fine, until, all of a sudden, he started to get closer to one of his classmates, Zuzanna. From that point on, his life started to change. Kamil and Zuzanna knew each other from junior high, but were never really friends before. Because Zuzanna, unlike Kamil, wasn't popular, which made their friendship even more surprising to people in their circles. Zuzanna came from a different kind of home than Kamil. She was raised without a dad, and there are 2 different stories I found explaining why. The first one says that the dad was never in the picture. Maybe he and Zuzanna's mom split up when she was a kid, or not even born yet. The other story I read is that the dad was absent for most of Zuza's life, but then, when she was a teenager, they got in touch and started to develop some sort of a relationship. However, after a while, her dad passed away. And this was the moment when Zuzanna started writing poems to deal with the pain. Because there were a few things that made Zuza stand out among her peers, but her being a poet was definitely the biggest one of them. She was even starting to get some recognition, mostly locally, and for her 18th birthday, her mom sponsored the publishing of the girl's very first poetry book. For some, her poetry was mature and interesting. For others, it was childish and trite. She would laugh the latter off, saying that some people just don't get her poetry. She would even describe herself as shamelessly young, shamelessly talented. Well, even if her poetry writing skills were debatable, her abilities as a soccer player weren't. Zuza, just like her mom when she was her age, was in a soccer team, which was quite unusual in and of itself because in Poland soccer is considered to be a sport for boys. What's more though, she was so good at soccer that her coaches wanted to draw her to something like a national youth team. Her mom was an avid fan of her daughter. In this regard, she would go to the matches and stand right by the goal, giving her daughter advice during the match. Zuza's mom expected a lot from her and reportedly kept her quite disciplined. There was a time when the girl was only allowed to go to school and training, after which she'd have to go home straight away. And maybe it was the lack of her social life and subsequently social skills that made her unpopular at school. Or maybe it was because of Susanna's liking for black clothes, dark makeup, and alternative music. I mean, as long as you can call Joy Division that. It seems to me that Susanna was quite a lonely person. Her mom, even though she kept her on a tight leash, was too busy with her career to focus on creating a bond with her daughter. The university life, because Zuza's mom was a uni professor, kept her constantly occupied, which is why Susanna was mostly raised by her grandma. Also, romantic relationship-wise, Zuza wasn't too lucky. Shortly before she started to hang out with Kamil, Susanna was in love. However, this story didn't end well for her. The girl Zuza was dating and, as it turned out later, had sex with, was a minor. And because of that, about the 3rd grade of high school, Zuza was facing criminal charges for pedophilia. Her homosexual relationship shortly before she got closer with Kamil makes it hard for me to believe that these two eventually became a couple, which is what the media kept saying when covering this case. I mean, I know that the girl could have been bisexual. However, as it was discovered later on by a psychiatrist during her mental health assessment, Susanna had quite an unhealthy attitude towards the opposite sex. She thought lesser of men, considered them generally undeserving, and believed that they have to work really hard for any sort of recognition or appreciation. I certainly believe, though, that there was some sort of attraction between Kamil and Zuza, to the point that Kamil broke up with his girlfriend at the time and started hanging out with Susanna. They would spend so much time together that, even though both were considered very smart, they started to get in trouble at school. Their grades worsened and attendance lowered, and maybe for Zuza, skipping school wasn't anything unusual. It was for Kamil, though, a boy who used to be, quote-unquote, normal and wouldn't cause any trouble. His parents, seeing that, gradually stopped recognizing their own son. Because Kamil changed. It looked as if he tried to converse to his new friend. He would also start wearing dark clothes, listen to the same kind of music as she would, cared less and less about school. He and Zuza preferred to spend their time at hers because her mom would be either absent or busy. They would be smoking weed and watching movies instead of going to school. David Lynch, Quentin Tarantino, and especially Mary Harron and her American Psycho were their favorites. At some point, Kamil's parents felt like they had to intervene. At first, they tried talking with their son. They didn't like Zuza, considered her bad news, and saw that this girl definitely had a strong and not a particularly good influence on Kamil. Agnieszka and Jerzy tried to convince the boy that maybe Zuzanna wasn't the best friend he could have. They would tell him that he should focus on studying, as they probably expected him to go to uni after high school. Needless to say, though, these peace talks didn't really work. Moving on, the school year finally ends, and the 2nd grade is over. It's the summer of 2014, and an important event takes place. Kamil and Zuza go together for a very popular in Poland music festival, Opener, in Gdynia, a beautiful town which is the part of the Tri-City, right by the Baltic Sea. And for the first time in their lives, they can experience absolute freedom. Even though it only lasted for a few days, when you're 18, festivals like this are something that you just won't forget. No parents, no school, the middle of summer, and the two of them among thousands of people that went there for the same reason. To have fun, to be carefree, to drink, smoke, and forget about the world. it must have felt good. Kamil and Zuzia met some people there, including 2 uni students, Linda and Marcin, or rather about to be students, given they were both 19, they were probably starting uni that fall semester. Both were from Poznań, so when the festival ended, Kamil, Zuzia, Marcin and Linda didn't have a chance to see each other, but they kept in touch somehow, probably on social media. Linda and Marcin couldn't even expect that meeting these 2 18-year-olds at Opener could irreversibly change their life, for worse. Summer ends, school starts, and both Kamil and Zuzia begin the last year of their high school. It didn't start well for Zuzanna. As I mentioned earlier, she was facing criminal charges for having sex with a girl under 15, that is, her ex-girlfriend. I didn't find information on whether she got sentenced for that or not, and if so, what the sentence was. However, her criminal case impacted her school record, obviously. As I said before, Zuzanna wasn't too popular among her fellow students. They considered her weird and dark, and she didn't have many friends. And then when she got charged with pedophilia, the students' body wrote a petition to the headmaster, basically saying they didn't want her at school and that she should be kicked out. Some believe that it weren't students who requested this. More likely it was the parents and teachers, but still, the document was signed by the students and the headmaster had to do something about it. So he called Zuzia's mom to school for a chat and kindly asked her to remove her daughter from school and transfer her elsewhere, which Zuzia's mom did. Reportedly, the students from the girls' new school weren't too happy to have her and were quite cautious around her. Does that mean that now that Kamil and Zuzanna are going to 2 different schools, they stopped seeing each other? Of course not. It didn't change anything. The problem was that it was their last year of high school, which ends with finals. Their results determine if and where you can go to uni, if you want to. And I don't know about Kamil, but his parents definitely didn't want him to end his education in high school. They were not only worried sick about his behavior, his grades, his school skipping, but they're also angry, both at him as well as at Zuzia. At him, because he wouldn't listen to them. They thought he should have broken it off with Zuzia and started taking school more seriously again. At her, because she had a strong influence on their son. Agnieszka and Jerzy would even call Zuzia a one-person cult. They tried to cut Kamil off the money and kept grounding him, as it seemed that talking to him didn't make much sense at that point, and everything was to no avail. But it wasn't only the parents who were angry. Kamil and Zuzia hated this situation probably even more than Kamil's parents. They were 18, or almost 18 in Kamil's case, so legally adults, but still treated like kids. They were suffocating in the situation, knowing that to some extent they had to obey their parents because they're reliant on them financially, as 2 teenagers. All Kamil and Zuzia wanted was independence from the parents, school, expectations. They wanted to make their own decisions regarding their future, the people they could hang out with, and the way they spent their time. At some point, they started dreaming. How would it be to live freely, no supervision, no responsibilities, just them 2 against the world? How would it feel to just live there in the moment, like in the summer at Opener? Not for a few days though, but forever. And then they realized they could live like this if the parents were gone. No, not Zuzia's mom, because she wasn't there anyway. She was so busy at this point that she hardly registered what was going on in her daughter's life. But Kamil's parents, they were the main obstacle. Also, their death could bring something else besides freedom. Because to live the life Kamil and Zuzia wanted, they either needed a job or easy money. I'm guessing that going to work was ruled out immediately. Life would be too normal, too average, plus they had pretty much no education, no experience, and no chance to get a good job anyway. So how to get the money? In the Netflix documentary that covered this story in the pilot episode, it's called Polish Murder Mysteries, and I strongly recommend watching it. I will link it down below. One of the journalists who was writing about this case shortly after it happened said something interesting. And even though I've known this case since 2014, this is the first time somebody shared this information. I only heard it last year. So this journalist said, that before 2012, Camille's parents couldn't afford to buy land and build a house, but this changed when they inherited the money once one of their relatives died, as I told you at the beginning of this episode. And as it turned out, a similar situation happened in Zuza's life. One of her family members died, I think it was her uncle, and she inherited a flat from him. So maybe, as this journalist said, they saw an opportunity in that. That maybe in their heads, someone's death went hand in hand with the money one could inherit. Whatever the reasoning behind this was, Zuza got really excited. She figured that the house was worth loads of money because it was new, plus there's like 2 cars in the family. They should be fine for a good while after selling this. And they obviously didn't want to wait for 50 years for Camille to eventually come into money because they needed it right then. Getting rich takes some planning and also, in this case, some encouragement. Reportedly, Camille wasn't too willing to hurt his parents at first, but agreed eventually when he visualized his life afterwards. Jail time wasn't even taken into consideration. Camille and Susanna thought about everything: how to do what they planned to do and not get caught, and how to make it look artsy. This word came to my mind because it always reminds me of Patrick Bateman talking about Genesis music before they released the Duke album, and American Psycho was one of the movies that, according to the media, inspired Camille and Susanna to commit this crime. I don't believe this, but I think they got some scenography ideas from it. So our natural-born killers, because they reportedly took some inspiration from this movie as well, figured that it would be best to arrange for the crime scene to look like there was a break-in to the house that ended tragically. Camille was supposed to be a survivor, but eventually they gave up on this part of the plan. After consideration, they figured they would make it look like a burglary, but at the time of the event it was supposed to seem that they were both far away from Rakowiska. And this is where Zuza's poetry writing came in handy. A few months earlier, in the spring of 2014, some of the girls' poems were discovered on a website for young authors. The page's, owner or admin got in touch with her friend, who runs something like a cultural club in Krakow. So the website's owner called her friend and said, "Hey, there's this girl, Maria, who writes. She's quite good and maybe you could invite her to one of your meetings." You're probably wondering why she said Maria. The answer is simple. Zuzanna wasn't publishing under her name. She used the pseudonym of Maria Goniewicz. So the man who ran the club got in touch with Zuzanna/Maria and asked her to come over to Krakow to, not really sure how to call it, poetry reading? He would organize these meetings quite regularly so that authors could share their work, read it out loud, get some feedback, and just have fun around people similar to them. So Zuzanna went to Krakow in spring, and once she knew that these meetings take place more often, she got in touch with the club owner around December and asked if she could come over once again. She also asked if she and her friend, who's coming along, could spend a night in the owner's apartment, as they're coming from far and knew no one in Krakow, and they didn't have money for the hotel. The owner agreed to Zuza coming over to the meeting, but refused to host them in his house. He would later say in the Netflix documentary that he's relieved he refused, even though he didn't think they would hurt him in any way. So Zuzanna and Camille have an alibi prepared now. They're going to Krakow, in theory, for Zuza's meeting, but the plan was that everyone thinks they were far away from Rakowiska at the time of the event. Their phones were supposed to log into the BTS station in Krakow and then get turned off. There was a hole in this plan though, because how to get to Krakow when you have no car and assumingly no driver's license? Do you remember the couple from the opener festival, Martin and Linda? Martin had a car, and he agreed to drive Zuza and Camille to Krakow. He didn't do it for free though. He was offered a ridiculous amount of money for this, $5,000, which is about $1,200. But Camille and Zuza were about to get rich, so they probably thought, what the heck, we can afford this. On Friday, the 12th of December 2014, Camille and Zuza went to Warsaw, probably on a train, maybe even the same one that his dad was using to get to work and back every day. They got some shopping done there, like rubber gloves. They also tried to purchase these transparent raincoats to make themselves look like Patrick Bateman, but couldn't find them anywhere. Like I said, they got some scenography ideas from American Psycho. Later that day, Friday the 12th, they got picked up by Martin and Linda from Warsaw, and off they went for over a 300-kilometer journey to Krakow. They were almost there when Zuzia told Kamil to text his mom that they were in Krakow and that everything was fine. Once that was done, they both turned off their phones, and the last trace of their location was registered in Krakow, as planned. When still in the car, getting to the poetry club, Zuzia all of a sudden said, "Oh, shoot, I forgot my laptop. We have to go get it back." And the driver, Martin, said, "What the hell are you talking about? We're not going back anywhere. We're in Krakow already." But Zuzia said, "Yeah, I know, but this is really important. All of my poems are there. I wanted to read it out loud, and I don't have my book on me, so..." One might only imagine how mad Martin could have been at that point, because he'd just driven over 300 kilometers from Warsaw, and before that, about 310 kilometers from Poznań, where he and Linda lived, and then he heard that he had to go back. And not even to Warsaw, but to Rakowiska, which is about 450 kilometers away from Krakow, all in one night. So he obviously didn't want to do this, but Zuzia and Kamil's plan was pretty much based on this entire move, so Zuzia knew she had to up the ante. She offered him an additional 5K to drive them back to Rakowiska, and then again to Krakow. Money talks, so Martin agreed. With their phones still turned off, Kamil and Zuzia got to Rakowiska around 2 a.m. in the morning. It was technically already Saturday, the 13th of December. Because Martin had never been there before, he had absolutely no idea that the house he was just pulling up at was not Zuzia's house, but Kamil's, and that her laptop was definitely not there. Kamil and Zuzanna jumped out of the car and said that they would be right back. They went into the yard, keeping their steps quiet. They opened the door, and Kamil let the dog out because the dog didn't know it had to be quiet. The door closed. They took off their shoes, put the rubber gloves on, and took out hunting knives that Zuzia took from her grandpa. They went upstairs to the main bedroom and stood over Kamil's sleeping parents. Kamil didn't want to be the one who killed his mom, so he went over to his dad's side, whereas Zuzia stayed at the mom's side of the bed. And on count of 3, the massacre began. They started stabbing all over the parents' bodies, mostly their stomachs and necks. Kamil's mom, Agnieszka, woke up at some point because of the pain, jumped out of the bed and tried to run for her life. Kamil, who was dealing with his father at the time, saw it and chased after his mother. Got her downstairs. She was screaming for help, even managed to open the door trying to get outside, but failed. Got her dearest only son, grabbed her, and slit her throat 3 times. As he later said, he did it because he didn't want her to suffer anymore. In the meantime, Zuzia was still upstairs, fighting with Jerzy, an 18-year-old girl trying to stab a 40-year-old fit and strong man, a border guard, to death. It wasn't easy. She even started to lose. Jerzy grabbed her by the neck and tried to strangle her. So Zuzia bit him, leaving her entire jaw print and saliva on his arm. She knew it was not good, but right then she had no time to think about it. She had to kill him first. And eventually, somehow, managed. Some sources say that she even got his eyes with her nails. And I hope this is not true. What surely happened, though, is that Kamil's father dropped dead in his own bed because he bled out from dozens of stab wounds he got. The job, as Zuzia would later call it, had been done. There's one problem, though. This jaw print Zuzia left on Kamil's father's arm. She knew she couldn't leave him like this because of her DNA, so she tried to cut the arm off with one of the hunting knives she brought. It didn't work, though, and thank God for that, because later on this DNA trace became another evidence on their trial. As this was supposed to look like a burglary that ended badly, Zuzia and Kamil needed some crips, so they took a laptop and I think 2 smartphones from home. They changed and put the blood-stained clothes in a backpack, along with the knives and stolen goods. They left the house and didn't even close the door behind them. I don't know if they even realized for how long they had been gone, but it was enough for Martin and Linda to get impatient and leave. After all, Zuzia and Kamil were only supposed to pop into the house, grab a laptop and leave, whereas they disappeared for about an hour. And this was the moment when their sneaky "we're in Krakow" plan went to, So it's the middle of a December night. They have a backpack full of evidence for the crime they had just committed. No car, no way to get back to Krakow. So what did they do? Yes, one of them took out their phone, turned it on, and called Martin, asking him to turn back and pick them up. That's how on the night of the murder, either Zuzia's or Kamil's phone, for I'm not sure which one it was, logged into the BTS station in Biała Podlaska area, at the time when they were both supposed to be in Krakow. But okay, they will think about it later. Luckily for them, they managed to convince Martin to come back, and when he saw them, he immediately knew something was off. The only question he asked, though, was that what took them so long? And Kamil and Zuzanna said that they got hungry, prepared some food, also wanted to freshen up a bit. But when they pulled up at the nearest petrol station and for some reason Martin opened up the boot of his car, he discovered the backpack. I'm not sure if it was opened or maybe it was bloodstained, and that made him curious. Whatever it was, he saw the bloody clothes and knives, the goods stolen from the house, and he realized what had happened. He didn't have to think about it for too long, though, because when Zuzia saw him looking at the backpack, she said, "Yeah, we did it. We killed them." If you think that Martin took it as his cue to call the police and say that he had 2 teenage murderers in the car, then you're wrong. He did something else. He used this as leverage and simply blackmailed Zuzanna, saying that if she wanted him to keep quiet about this, she had to pay him more. No idea how they made that deal and what it was exactly, because Zuzia and Kamil hadn't had any money yet. They were hoping for Kamil to inherit it shortly, but at that point, they're completely broke. But regardless of that, Martin agreed. They hopped into the car and drove over 450 kilometers back to Krakow. They got there on a Saturday morning. The original plan was that they were spending the night at one of Zuzia's friends from Biała Podlaska. Her name was Karolina. But they were supposed to turn up at hers the evening before, and Karolina had been waiting for them all night. She was very surprised to see Kamil and Zuzia not only in the morning, but also in quite a bad state. And I don't even mean they looked tired, for they were up all night after all, but I'm also guessing that despite them having changed after the murder, they might have still had some blood on them, maybe on their faces or hands or shoes. So Karolina asked her friends what happened. Were they alright? To that, Kamil and Zuzia replied, "No, not really, because they got mugged and beaten up at the railway station and that it was an awful night." So Karolina immediately said they should go to the police and report it, but obviously the police station was the very last place these two wanted to go to, so they said they didn't trust the police and that's it. They went to freshen up and maybe nap for a bit, and after a while, Karolina received a phone call from one of her friends from Biała Podlaska. And much to her dismay, Karolina heard that tragic news just broke in their hometown, news that pertained to one of their common friends, Kamil. The person who called said that Kamil's parents were discovered dead that morning, and that nobody really knew what happened, but the situation already looked weird, and the police were looking for Kamil. Karolina froze. At that point, all the pieces must have fallen into the right places in her head, and she might have realized that people who were staying at her flat might have had something to do with that situation. And how did that morning look like in Rakowiska? The neighbor of the N family, I didn't mention that earlier, their surname started with the N letter. So the neighbor looked out his window that morning and saw that his neighbor's front door was open. Not like wide open, but there was a gap, and it was weird because it was December, so it was cold. Plus, there was a weird dark stain on the wall right by the door. So the neighbor immediately called 112. By the way, in Europe, it's 112, not 911, in case you ever need to call emergency services when you're here, so remember that. Or just press the emergency button on your iPhone. Anyways, the police thought that there had been a break-in. After all, they didn't know what the stain on the wall was, so they focused on the open door, and that's why they sent 2 officers over. The officers, once they arrived, talked first with the neighbor who called the emergency services, and he said that, yeah, he saw the door open, there was the stain that looked like blood and, well, he heard a woman screaming and a dog barking at night around 2 a.m., but it died rather quickly, so he went to sleep. If there is any wisdom coming from this episode, you guys, it would be that. Keep good relationships with your neighbors, so that if you ever scream for help in the middle of the night, they won't ignore it. The police officers went to the N family's house, slightly alerted now after what they just heard from the neighbor. They pushed the door open, and immediately, once they entered, they saw a woman lying on the floor in a pool of blood. They didn't expect that. Thinking that the attacker could still be in the house, they drew their guns and started to check the building. Upstairs, in one of the bedrooms, they found another body, this time of a man. And when going over to this address, they checked who the owners of the house were, so they could have assumed that the bodies they found were of Agnieszka and Jerzy. But the police also knew that the couple had a son, Kamil, and he was nowhere to be found in the house or around it. At the same time, the police were relieved that they hadn't found a third body, but the question remained, where was the boy? The first theories of what might have happened started to pop up in the investigators' heads as they kept coming one after another to the crime scene. They knew that the family was doing okay financially. Maybe they weren't rich, but doing better than average. So maybe the boy got kidnapped. Maybe he's in danger now. Another theory was that the couple was attacked because of Jerzy's job as a border guard. Maybe he made someone angry. But at the same time, there are some items missing from the house, so maybe it was a burglary that went completely awry. Because it looked like the burglars came into the house and got caught red-handed by the owners, or rather, one of the owners, because Jerzy was found dead in his bed. The police knew they had to find Kamil, first of all to make sure he was alright, and second, to ask him questions about the previous night. From the neighbors, the police found out that Kamil had a girlfriend and that she might know where he was. They sent someone over to her address. Her mother opened the door and said, "Yeah, Kamil and Zuzar are in Krakow. My daughter went there for a poetry reading meeting. She's a poet, you see." She probably also told them where they were supposed to be staying for the night. The police officers from Lublin, which is the biggest town of the Lubelskie Voivodeship, and their office took over the case, went over to Krakow to get the boy, and probably in the meantime, as they were going over there, they received information that the data from the nearest BTS station was retrieved. To their surprise, even though both Zuzа and Kamil were supposed to be in Krakow last night, according to Zuza's mom, one of the teenagers' phones logged into the area of Kamil's house about 3 a.m. that night. The police got to Karolina's flat later in the afternoon. It was still Saturday. She opened the door and instantly knew what this was about. She agreed for the flat to be searched by the officers. The backpack, along with its bloody contents, was found in one of the trash bins around the building. Zuzanna and Kamil were immediately arrested and taken to Lublin, where the first interrogation took place. Of course, they were already separated at that point and didn't know what one another was telling the police. When asked about the events of the previous night, Kamil denied he had anything to do with this. He was even kind of outraged that the police were suspecting him of killing his parents, now that he's orphaned and heartbroken. Zuzanna, on the other hand, pled guilty right away. Yes, they did it. What's more, if she had a chance to do it all over again, she would, and she would have done it better than the first time around. She wouldn't use knives, because they were kind of lame. She also said that she wanted to burn the entire place down so that no evidence is left to retrieve. I'm wondering, if they put the house on fire, was she counting on the insurance money or what? Anyway, the police were shocked, to say the least. An 18-year-old girl was sitting in front of them, telling them how she killed 2 people and arranged for it to look like a burglary. The investigators kind of hoped that she was making this up. After all, she was a big gushy poet, and maybe all this was just her imagination. But the more they listened, and then the more evidence was collected, they realized that this was what happened. That 2 teenagers killed the parents of one of them to get some money and freedom. And the way they did it was mind-blowing. The most experienced officers said they had never seen anything like this. The amount of blood was everywhere, which made the crime scene smell just awfully. The motive, and lastly people who turned out to be guilty of it, The police couldn't wrap their heads around it. The story immediately covered the front pages of national newspapers and was being talked about on TV for weeks. The local community couldn't believe what happened. Agnieszka and Jerzy were liked and, as far as I know, are still missed by their friends, family, and co-workers. They were normal, hardworking people, helpful and dedicated parents whose only sin was that they wanted to protect their son and wanted the best for him. The trial for the murderers took place about a year later. Kamil eventually pled guilty. However, his and Zuzanna's defense lives were separated. Kamil's lawyers kept saying that the boy didn't want to do this and got manipulated, that it was Zuza who was the brain of this operation. Zuzanna's lawyers said pretty much the exact same thing, just the other way around, that it was Kamil who manipulated Zuzanna into doing this. I'm not sure if they ever truly felt sorry for what they did. Zuzanna cried only once at the trial. I think it was the last hearing. And then she said that she was heartbroken because she would never have a chance of starting a family of her own, which apparently she had always dreamt of. I think they were only sorry for getting caught despite having made such a sophisticated plan that led the police straight to them within the first 24 hours of the murder. And they were probably terrified because they were facing a life sentence, for this was what the prosecution wanted for them. However, they never got a life sentence, only 25 years in prison. The judge said that there was still a chance for them to live a decent life once they're out of jail, and that these 25 years were still more than their entire lifetime up to that point. If Kamil and Zuzanna are lucky and get parole, they will be out at the age of 38. If not, they'll have to stay in jail for 5 more years. What's interesting, this case was appealed by the prosecution, who found a 25-year imprisonment sentence insufficient in this case and demanded life imprisonment for both of the killers. However, the appeal court upheld the original sentence. And then it got even more interesting because the Attorney General / the Minister of Justice, because that's one and the same person in Poland, got involved and appealed once again, this time to the Supreme Court, but still, the sentence was upheld. These weren't the only convictions in this case. Marcin and Linda eventually went to the police when the news broke in the media and admitted that they had known about the murder before anyone else. They probably understood that sooner or later, the police would find out who helped Zuzanna and Kamil get to Krakow. Also, let's not forget that when Marcin discovered the backpack in the Book of the Schar, he didn't report it to the police, but he used this as an opportunity to blackmail Zuza and demand more money for silence. He got sentenced to 1 year imprisonment, suspended for 3 years, plus an 8,000 fine. Linda, however, got a lower sentence, 8 months imprisonment, suspended for 3 years, plus a 5,000 fine. It doesn't seem like much, but let's remember that this is enough to probably get kicked out from uni and to never be able to do some jobs in the future, for they require a clean record. And they were only 19 at the time. Before I wrap it up for today, I'd like to share some of my thoughts. One of the things that really bothered me about this case, apart from it being a gruesome murder of 2 completely innocent people, was the way that the story was covered by the media. Zuzanna was portrayed as an evil witch who led a poor boy astray and manipulated him into killing his own parents for money. Both Zuzanna and Kamil were evaluated by psychiatrists for trial purposes, and it was discovered that Zuzanna is not a psychopath or a sociopath, and that she didn't really have any strong leadership skills. She was said to be an egocentric and a narcissist, and she had a tendency to cover her flaws in front of others. But she wasn't a brain to Kamil's Pinky, if you know what I mean. On the other hand, it was suspected that Kamil had a dependent kind of mentality, that he was easy to be led, but surprisingly, no. I feel like people forget that it was his parents that they killed. That Zuzanna had absolutely no bond with Agnieszka and Jerzy, unlike Kamil, who spent his entire life with his parents, was raised and loved by them the most in this world. For Zuzanna, it was just a job, as she would describe it later, and this way of thinking doesn't surprise me as much as Kamil's similar approach to this matter. Also, it was said by pretty much every newspaper in this country that Kamil's parents were against his relationship with Zuzanna, and that's why they were killed. Like I mentioned before, I'm not entirely sure if these two were actually romantically involved with each other. I think that they might have been attracted to one another, but the true reason for the murder was their longing for freedom, adulthood, and lack of responsibilities. That and greed, not love. By the way, Kamil obviously didn't inherit anything after his parents' death, as he was found guilty of killing them. Therefore, some further relatives got the house. From what I know, nobody wanted to live in it. And I don't even mean the family, because that's quite understandable. The house was on the market for quite a long time, and eventually it did get sold, but for a ridiculously low price, given the fact that it was new, quite big, and in a nice location. The ironic thing is that Kamil and Zuzanna were longing for freedom so much that they didn't even realize that it was just around the corner. They were in the 3rd grade of high school, and the summer semester of the senior year always ends around April due to the final exams taking place in May. So if they were patient and kept going to school, they would have been free in just a few months. Maybe if they did well at the exams, they would have gone to uni for 3 or 5 years, depending on the course, bachelor or master's. Their parents would probably support them financially, and Kamil and Zuzanna would have nothing to worry about. They could be together if they wanted to, meet new people, party, just enjoy life like thousands of people of their age. Instead, all they got for their poor decisions was 25 years in prison and depression. And I'm saying this because, reportedly, Kamil didn't take his jail time well, and there has been a gossip going around for years now. But I repeat, a gossip, and I have no way of confirming this, that he took his own life in jail. He has no family left. I mean, technically he does, but no one visits him. He's alone. Zuzanna, though, she seems to be doing alright. She's regularly visited by her mom, who supported her through the entire trial, and it would be, again, ironic to find out that Zuza and her mom have the best relationship now that Zuza is incarcerated. Anyway, the girl, or actually now a grown woman, is still a poet, and she even won some prison poetry writing competitions. To wrap this all up, I'd like to say that I'm sorry that there is so little information about the victims, Agnieszka and Jerzy, and so much about their killers. I guess this is natural in cases like this, but I would still like to pay tribute to these people whom I never met and now I'm talking about. I want them to be remembered, and I hope this podcast episode will help. That's it for today, folks. Please let me know what you think about this case in the comment section, and I hope we'll hear each other in the next episode.